League of Nations, we looked at its goals, its aims, therefore that will give us an idea to explain whether it was successful or not, because you can only determine success in terms of what it is that you're trying to succeed in. We then looked at how the United League of Nations hoped to prevent future wars, alright, and by doing that we were able to see what potential weaknesses there would be in the League of Nations and what and how to use that as a proper examples. All right. So we're going to move on now, because the next question that we had, as we answered all of these, was that actually the League of Nations was quite successful in the 1920s, but in most areas, and in the 1930s in its key areas, which was in reducing conflict and arbitrating disputes, it was in the 1930s that it failed. So the question is therefore, why did the League of Nations have some successes in the 1920s? And so what I've put on here, because this is a why-styly question, so for a why-styly question you have to write 2 paragraphs. Alright, you have to explain and evaluate 2 reasons. You've got this. First, the First World War, and let's write this down. I read an interesting study yesterday that shows that actually if you actually write something, you've got far more likely to remember it than if you type. Something to do with not kinetic energy, but the mere fact of doing it and the time. The physicality of it means that it's more likely to lodge inside your brain. So, First World War had been horrific. Memories of the horrific trench warfare in their minds. People of all countries were anxious to keep the peace. I would add to that as well that Britain and France had a lot of kudos. The biggest war in history had taken place, and Britain and France had won it. Then clearly Britain and France could beat anybody, so why pick a fight with Britain and France? You're going to lose. And in the 1920s, the League does not face the major challenges that arose in the 1930s. They arose from Japan, Italy, and Germany. Yesterday we called these the revisionist powers, because they want to revise, change the Treaty of Versailles. They weren't happy with it for their own reasons. They wanted to change it. And then also, the economy was doing very well in the 1920s. And actually it was the Great Depression that affected people in the 1930s. So we have these 2 reasons. The positive, kind of, is that everybody's fed up with war, nobody wants to fight a war. This was a war to end a war. Britain and France is really high kudos, so people are going to do what they say. Alright, and in the 1920s, it doesn't face the challenges that it faces in the 1930s, and the challenges it faces in the 1930s are twofold. They're political and military, from countries Italy, Japan, Germany, who want to change these systems, and economic in terms of the Great Depression caused by the Wall Street crash. Great Depression and Wall Street crash, 2 separate things. What's interesting here, when we look at this, is it's Japan first, then it's Italy, then it's Germany. This reveals something interesting. Hitler's late to the party. The road to the Second World War has already started. He's late. Japan's already invaded places. Italy's already invaded places. They've both got away with it. Hitler, silly man, he invades somebody when people have suddenly realised invading other countries is a bad thing. He's late. War's already started. This is important later on for when we look at appeasement and we look at Britain and France trying to avoid war with Germany. Spoiler, war's already happening. War's already happening. So, here's an essay question. Here's a how far question. How far was the League of Nations quite successful in the first 10 years of its existence. They will say 10 years specifically because it ends in 1930, which means you're already talking about the 20s, which means anybody mentioning Manchuria or Abyssinia, you will be not get any marks. Alright, so I've split this into 5 points, some of which I've basically talked about. The aftermath of World War I, people wanted it to succeed. They didn't want war anymore. Also, most countries were exhausted. They fought huge conflicts and really don't want to go through that again. Economic prosperity, which is the roaring 20s. This is the jazz age. When countries are rich, they're less likely to go to war, because war destroys prosperity, war destroys your wealth. It's why, again, when we look at Germany, Italy and Japan, those are the 3 countries that are very badly affected by the Great Depression. It's poor countries with nothing to lose who tend to start wars. Just like, arguably, it's poor people with nothing to lose who are likely to rob you on the street. Yeah, Elon Musk doesn't go around mugging people to steal their handbags. He's already got enough money, he's not going to do that. Britain and French, kudos and confidence, they're high. Alright, they're high and they do all the things that you asked them to do. So we've got 3 examples of this. 1, Upper Silesia, which we'll talk about, when the League of Nations organised a plebiscite, a referendum. Britain and France send their troops there. Well, hey, we're going to enforce what happens. Over Bulgaria, they enforce what happens. In the Ruhr crisis, and remember you're saying, oh, the Ruhr crisis, naughty France, invading the Ruhr. That's what you have to do to keep the League of Nations working. You criticise France for invading the Ruhr when Germany fails to fulfil its obligations under the Treaty of Versailles. France and Belgium do everything you accuse them of not doing in the 1930s. In the 1930s, you say, France, you should be stopping the invasion of the Rhineland. France, you should be stopping Anschluss. Well, when France did something over reparations, everybody's like, well, naughty France, shouldn't do that. That's a bit harsh. You bully French. Naughty France. But here they're willing to do it. So this is why it succeeds in the 1920s, but likewise, understand why they suddenly don't in the 1930s. Because again, Britain and France is not united on this. Remember, every time you criticise a country when we come to the 1930s and you start critiquing appeasement, think about what that actually means in practice, what you're arguing for in practice. Because you've got to have, to be thinking critically, you've got to have consistency. You cannot argue against appeasement if you also argue against the French occupation of the Ruhr. The revisionist powers, Germany, Italy and Japan, they're quite weak. Alright, so they're unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles, but they're not strong enough to attempt change. By the 1930s, they will be strong enough to attempt change. We've also got some good things about the League of Nations, right? The League of Nations isn't just about preventing war and arbitrating disputes. Yes, that's one of its main things, and yes, when you talk about it being a failure, it fails in one of its main terms, what it set out to do, but also it does have some successes. It helps refugees. The Health Committee, later the World Health Organization, combats disease. The International Labour Organization improves working conditions. It tackles slavery and drugs. Transportation, deals with transportation and weird things like telecommunications and stuff. If you're going to have transportation links and you're going to have telephonic communication and stuff between countries, you need to have international protocols so that what works in one country can work in another country. This is really important. Something like, at this stage, we've got the growing airline industry. Well, how do you organise that? How do you organise airline safety so that what's certified as safe in Belgium is the same as what's certified safe in Bolivia? how do you sort out air traffic control? That's a success. Can you imagine if there was every country had its own inspections for planes and had its own air traffic control? It'd be a nightmare. But they do that. Well done. So, 2 successes of the League of Nations. Can you give me 2 successes of the League of Nations, and I'm going to talk about them and show you how you would write them.
Technically we can see them, but...
No, you can't. Yes, you can. Boo. Alright, so these are the 2 ones I would use. Alright, because they're straightforward. The first one is Island Islands. So, these are islands between Sweden and Finland. Midway between the 2 countries. Why is this a thing now? Well, Finland is independent. Finland's got independence from Russia following the Bolshevik Revolution, following both revolutions. Both were threatening to fight them. Dun dun dun. So they appealed to the League of Nations, and the League of Nations, they sat down, they looked at maps, they read history books, they stroked their chins, and they said the island should go to Finland. Hurrah! And Sweden was like, oh, okay then, fair enough. And war was avoided. Huzzah! Upper Silesia. Area, Lower Silesia has been given to Poland as part of the Treaty of Versailles, but Upper Silesia, where the border between Germany and Poland is going to be, is claimed by both countries. So the League of Nations says, alright guys, don't worry. We'll have a plebiscite. You can decide which country you want to wish to join. And to ensure, this is a crucial bit, to ensure that it was free and fair, Britain and France sent troops. To ensure the League of Nations actions was carried out. Generally, the countryside voted to stay Polish, wanted to become Polish, because that's where Polish people lived, and the cities where Germans lived voted to be German. Again, this shows you Woodrow Wilson's idea of national self-determination in Eastern Europe to be a load of old nonsense. But the League of Nations takes account of this and draws a map, and people accept the situation. 2 things, let's note some things from this. What's the first thing you notice about the date?
They're both in the same year, in beginning of 1920s.
They're at the beginning of the 1920s. So this is when the League of everybody's love, League of Nations love, is at its peak. This is the honeymoon period of the League of Nations. Alright, as time goes by, just like any honeymoon, it wears off. They start arguing and falling out, and it's a disaster. Alright, so this is early stages, and what we'll look at as time goes on, the League of Nations has less and less success. Secondly, we notice that this is between Sweden and Finland. They're nice countries. Alright, they're both weak countries, but they're nice, they're law-abiding countries. And thirdly, this is why Upper Silesia is useful for you later on as evidence, because you're using these to describe answering questions, but you're also using this as your evidence to look at why the League of Nations succeeded in some areas and failed in others. Upper Silesia is an excellent example of a success, but it's a success because Britain and France, one, act together, they're united, and secondly, they put troops in the ground. They can do this in 1921 because they still haven't properly demobilised their armies yet, so it's easier if you've got lots of soldiers to send soldiers off into Germany. Does that make sense? Yes, Mr. Wilmot, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Cider. Alright, have we got that down? May I move on to the next one? This is one I want to talk about a little bit more detail because this is always a tricky one that comes up. It's one that they like to talk about a lot. So we have the Corfu incident in 1923. This is the first incident in the assertion of power by Mussolini in foreign affairs. I spoke about Hitler being a latecomer to the invading countries business. He's also a latecomer to the dictator business. This is what he's trying to emulate in the beer hall putsch. Mussolini comes to power with a march on Rome. He starts off as a socialist and a communist and becomes like a fascist. He has like a newspaper owner, writer. And then he marches on Rome. The black shirts of the fascists. Do you know where the word fasciste comes from?
Lazio.
Yes, what does it mean?
No clue.
No clue. I don't know. Hey, stereotypical accent. Alright, so if you were remember, everything about Mussolini is all about reinventing the Roman Empire. Alright? It's all about the Roman Empire. And indeed, so is with Nazi Germany. Their flags and eagles and stuff, that's all like Roman regalia. So, if you were a Roman senator or you were a consul, in order to show off your power as a symbol of your power, you used to have your either slaves or your guards or people around you before, as you walked. You know, like today, you get the big buffaloes, politicians in their big 4x4s, and they have motorcycle outriders, and they pushing everybody out of the way. Politicians do that these days. In ancient Rome, obviously they didn't have SUVs, they had these dudes, and these dudes carried bits of wood, kind of like stripped bits of wood and fancy bits of wood that were called fascici, something like that. This was a symbol of their power, and the more of them that you had, the more powerful you were. So it comes from these types of sticks that showed your power in ancient Rome. So because of this, that's where the term fascism comes from. Okay? How is it different? Because it is different to National Socialism, Nazism. Because people confuse the two, and they think fascism is the same as Nazism, and they use those words interchangeably. You Nazi, you fascist. They're two different things. And at the beginning, when Mussolini and Hitler are enemies, because they have different perspectives, different political perspectives, different things over Austria, and we'll see how the seesaw changes between the two. But ideologically, they are not the same. What's similar and what's different?
They're both extremely nationalist.
They are both extremely nationalist. I would pass that on surface levels, yes, but their nationalism is different. On a surface level, yes. On a particular level, it's different. How is it different?
They both have like this sort of divide and conquer types.
Well, everybody does that.
Because the Nazis only believed in like the Aryan race.
Excellent. Yeah. National Socialism and Nazis are one more socialistic because they believe in a competition, so they have that socialist element to it, which the fascism doesn't. More importantly, they have a root of ethnicity. Alright? They have a racial element to it. Alright? That's why I'm saying that's the national point. The national point of fascism is the state. Everything is the state. That's what they kind of have in common. Everything comes, all power should be to the state. Put that in the bin. You're chewing gum. No, you're being a lizard. All power to the state. Now the state is like the traditional country under fascism. Under Nazism, it's ethnicity. Ethnicity, not just ethnicity, but also anti-Semitism. There's no anti-Semitism in fascism. In fact, if you're a Jew, being in Italy is one of the safest places to be up until the Nazis invaded 1943. Alright? So that's a big difference between the two. They are not the same. National Socialism Nazism has a socialist element to it, and it has a racial, particularly anti-Semitic elements to it, which fascism doesn't have. Fascism is about the state and the power of the state. They're both collectivist, that is, the organisation is bigger than the individual, is more important than the individual, but they have different outlooks in life. But they present themselves in a similar way. So, lots of men with guns marching in uniform. One for the state, one for the Volk. Okay, but the reasons behind it are different. Many people make the mistake thinking they're interchangeable, they're not. And it's because they end up fighting on the same side, alongside Japanese militarism, which again is completely different, because it's like an emperor military system, martial system. Okay, so let's go back to Corfu. This is Mussolini first getting involved. We have an international commission, because we have all of these new different states coming up here. We've got Greece, we've got Albania. They also fought wars, the two Balkan wars prior to World War One. There is a commission to determine the frontier between Greece and Italy. The leader of this commission, international commission, is an Italian General Tallini. He's found with 4 of his staff murdered near the Albanian border, but on Greek territory. Dun dun dun. The Italian government says he's been killed in Greece. You must pay reparations to us, this family, this great. How dare you kill this Italian person and 4 of his comrades? You must give us money. The Greeks go, we didn't do anything, shut up. No, we're not going to do that. And so Mussolini invades. He invades the island. He invades the island of Corfu. We'll take this in kind of reparations then, you nasty Greek people, you. Greeks are like League of Nations. We're going to appeal to the League of Nations. This is slightly a bit of an overreaction, don't you think? And under pressure from Britain and France, Mussolini withdraws. Hooray! On first look, prima facie, this is a great success. Britain and France, they've acted in unison. They've protected a small country from being intimidated by a larger company. This is a League of Nations success. Everybody should be doing their League of Nations dance. It's the League of Nations. It's the League of Nations. But Mussolini withdraws. I'm going to make a very bad joke now. Mussolini withdraws from Corfu, then uses what's called the Conference of Ambassadors. This is kind of like the Security Council. There's not a Security Council because everybody has to agree, but this is like the Security Council. And they talk to the ambassadors, and Britain and France basically back down and say, Greece, come on, you need to pay. Accept basically everything the Italians have demanded beforehand. So this is the first example that the League of Nations could be influenced by big countries. All countries are equal, except some countries are more equal than others. Alright? That's the Corfu incident. This is classic Britain and France stealing defeat from the jaws of victory.
I mean, weirdly does apply here, doesn't it?
Yes. So, question next, and this will be the final one that we have today, is why? Why did the League of Nations fail to stop the Italian aggression? Britain and France don't want to upset Mussolini. Let's look at, they're both fear in the same ways we had how Soviet Union fears Germany over World War II, and the United States fears communism. Well, Britain and France, particularly France, they fear Germany still. Alright, they still haven't got over that fear of Germany. And they have a problem. Who were the countries that Germany fought against in World War One? Britain?
France,
America.
So the
Belgium.
Belgium. Major countries, sorry, Belgium. Nice chocolate though. 2 more.
Russia.
Russia. One more.
No, we both said Russia.
We talked about it yesterday. They swap sides, yes.
Italy.
Italy. 5 countries. Britain, France, United States, Russia, Italy. 5 countries to beat Germany. Took 4 years. Only just beat. United States don't want to get involved anymore. They've gone. Russia, communist. They've gone. Britain and France. Who have you got left?
Italy.
Right? So that's why we have this. This is why we have the problems with Abyssinia later. Alright? The Entente coalition that defeats Germany is massively weakened. Now, France tries to replace Russia by setting up alliances with Poland and Czechoslovakia. It's not really the same. Yeah, it's not really the same. So this is the problem Britain and France face. This is the weirdness of the Treaty of Versailles. Is that actually both sides are weaker. Germany is weaker, but Germany can, because of reparations and because of the war, but Germany can repair itself. The Entente, that's outside their control. So they are weaker than they were when they joined a war that they very nearly lost. You have to look at that philosophical approach, that psychological approach, because it underlines everything. And that's why they have this, for want of a better word, flirtation with Mussolini. Alright? Do we go all the way with Mussolini or do we hold back? We don't know. Sometimes we'll get close and we'll flash our eyelids at him. Sometimes we might even have a hold hands. But if it's anything more than that, we stop and we go home. Because they need him. They need Italy to be part of that coalition again. But Mussolini plays his hand very badly and ends up being completely dependent on Hitler and on Germany. Whereas actually in the 1920s, he's in a position he wants to be. He can get pretty much whatever he wants. He also, well, we'll come on to that. Alright? So, behind the scenes, Mussolini works on a conference of ambassadors. Italy was a great power. It's shown itself willing to use force. Although it did have an army and it did back down. Britain and France feared another war. And they allowed it to be... Remember, one of the things about the League of Nations was no secret treaties. What's the first thing they do? They go into the conference and ambassadors and make an agreement in secret. Don't! So this really sets the scene. A powerful Mussolini is able to do... willing to go against the League, and the League of Nations could do nothing about this. Do you remember my assembly, at the end of the assembly, where I told you about the werewolf game? This is the League of Nations. One of the reasons why the League of Nations falls. If you have a powerful person who knows exactly what they want versus a group of people who don't really know what they want, that powerful person can manipulate, deceive, and get those individuals who don't know what they want to acquiesce to them. This is the werewolf game in action. And on that bombshell, it's 5 minutes to go. Not quite on that bombshell, we've got 5 minutes. Any other questions about Corfu? Corfu is a question that they like to throw at you. That's why I've overdone it here. Alright, they like to bring it in because it's one of those things that's often skipped over and is quite complex to get the nuances of. But once you have those nuances, you understand that it foreshadows. Oh, that's going to be an excellent word for your essay. It foreshadows what happens in the 1930s. Oh, copy that down. That's quite excellent. Sometimes I amaze myself with my genius. Corfu is the foreshadowment of the 1930s. All of the ingredients are here. A strong power, a divided Britain and France, seeking to appease that strong power. Corfu foreshadows Abyssinia. Do you know what foreshadows means, by the way?
Like predicting it forward.
Yeah, it's something that you would have in like a novel or something, or a film, which
Like you can tell that this will happen in the future.
Like in hindsight, you can tell that.
with
spoiler.
hindsight, yeah, you can't tell at the time because that would spoil everything. What's the point of watching the rest? All right, but it's what a clever writer does. When you look back on it, you can go, that's what they were getting at. Yeah, it's that foreshadowing. What's the other one that I like? Chekhov's gun.
What?
Do you know what Chekhov's gun means?
If a gun is introduced in one scene, it will be shot in another.
If a gun is introduced in the first act, it must be shot in the third act. So if you introduce something into a plot, you have to use it, because if you don't, you shouldn't introduce it into the plot. Chekhov's gun. If it's there, it has to be used. I don't know what context you could use that, but it's a nice context. I'm going to share two videos with you once I can remember to do it properly. One is from YouTube. One is very good about Tet Offensive. All right, and how it was a turning point and why it was a turning point. One thing that I got from that I hadn't realised, that sort of like makes more sense. Do you remember when I said about Tet Offensive being a change in popular mood, popular support for the Vietnam War? He describes it like this, and I think this is very true. There was opposition to the Vietnam War before the Tet Offensive, but it's from your usual people who oppose wars. All right, you look at who's opposing, like, let's say Gaza at the moment. It's your usual suspects. It's students and it's left-wing people. They're always going to oppose war. That's who it was before Tet Offensive. The usual suspects. After Tet Offensive, it's, for want of a better word, ordinary people. Alright, they're the ones who go on marches. Ex-soldiers go on marches. Alright, so it moves away from those group of people who you always know are going to protest against things to actually much more general support. That's the big thing of Tet Offensive. I thought that was a useful thing to know. And then the other one I want to show you is about the Soviet occupation of Budapest. There was a big siege in World War II of Budapest. It's the capital of Hungary. Big siege battle went on for about 3 months from December to February. And then the Soviets occupied the city and committed huge amounts of war crimes. The usual rape, pillage and destruction. Not only that, but also capturing... during the siege of Budapest, there's a guy called, I can't remember his name, which is a terrible thing, Raoul Wallman or something. He worked at the Swedish embassy, and he saved, let us put this in, and you can do me a favour now actually, you can take this to Miss Chandima. Thank you, ma'am. Can you just pop in here? Thank you.
It's a birthday cake?
It's Miss Chandima's birthday, so I'm going to ask you to take...
Happy birthday, sir.
No, not me. Miss Chandima. Miss Chandima. And he saved millions of lives, not millions of lives, tens of thousands of lives by when they were... Because Hungary was one of the last places that got rid of its Jewish population, and he went around with guns to his head as a Swedish diplomat along trains while he was being shot at, giving out Swedish passports. What did that mean? That meant that they were Swedish citizens, you can't touch them. They literally got a big sack of Swedish passports, or Swedish letters of mark, went along the trains that were going to take them to Auschwitz, gave them out to people, and went, right, come with me, these are Swedish citizens, you fire on them, you're declaring war on Sweden. Right. Absolute hero. Russians come in, they take him away, beat him up, torture him and shoot him. So I want you to see it, because when we talk about, I want to put it on there, because when we talk about the Cold War, there's no equivalence. All right, yes, we like to slag off the Americans, and they're quite easy to slag off for all of their things they do. But there's no equivalence with the butchery of the Soviet Union. It just isn't. It just isn't. And you have to see the difference when the British or the Americans occupy a city, and when they liberate a city, and when the Russians do, is completely different. All right, on that bombshell, can I give you that?